Hello. Happy 2025. I'm back for the one time that I come each year. I'm like Santa Claus, but like late. So yes, I'm back with another reading vlog. I did Storygraph again this year. I love Storygraph. I feel like I don't even know if I would really keep doing these vlogs if I didn't have Storygraph, but I just love looking at my stats and I love looking back at what I read this year. This year, I gave myself a challenge to only read things that are blue and orange. I'm kidding, but like, what the heck? This is not all that I read. I like borrowed stuff, but it's a year of blue and orange. Right. So my reading goal was to read, I wanted to do 24 books in 2024, which was not on purpose. When I posted my Storygraph wrap up to Facebook, my friend Amber said, "So does this mean you're going to read 25 books in 2025?" And I was like, I didn't even think about that until I made the Facebook post. And it just sounded so nice, 24 books in 2024. I do think it gives me a good excuse to like read one more book each year. I just wanted to read 2 books a month. I always make that my reading goal, but normally it ends up being closer to 20. But this year I did meet my reading goal of 24 books. I decided last year that I was going to help myself meet my reading goal by doing something that like all reading influencers do, right? You look at these influencers and you're like, how do they read 100 books in a year? That's crazy. But they're reading graphic novels and audiobooks. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm saying it's not fair for me to compare myself to them and then only like read with my eyes really long, like traditional books. So this year I did, I read like 4.5 of these through audiobook. And then I had 2 graphic novels because I got to December 31st and I still needed to finish 5 books. So I finished 3 books that I had been reading for months. I just had like a little bit left on these 3 books. I timed it really well. And then I still needed 2 more, so I just crammed in 2 graphic novels. So shout out to my friend Chris for giving me those recommendations. I think that even if I hadn't read those, I would have read only like 18 books, but my page count would have been pretty high because this year I read 9,516 pages, which is more pages than I've ever read, like by a long shot. Because let's say if on average each of the audiobooks was, one of them was really long. So let's say 400 times 4, that's 1,600. And each graphic novel was, that's like 2,000 pages total. So I still read more pages this year than I have in any of the past few years. Fewer books, but I read some really long books this year. The longest book I read this year was 800 pages, which is crazy. It's like, who am I? So my average time to finish a book was 2 months, and that sounds about right. I would say these days I normally read at least 2 books at a time. And before I started doing that, it usually took me about a month to finish one book if I'm just reading one at a time. I'm reading the same amount, just 2 things at once. And then I'm also usually listening to something at the gym. In this statistic, I did not mark the graphic novels that I read in a single day because I felt like that would skew the results. But I guess if you counted those, it might go down to like 1.5 months. But yeah, that sounds about right. I'm a slow reader and I like to spend time with a book. I've decided that I just don't hate reading slowly that much. Like, it is a bummer, and I'll talk about this when I talk about Magnus Chase. It can really be a bummer to enjoy a book so much that you read it really, really fast, and then you're like, wow, now I'm out of that universe. Like, I'll never get to experience that universe for the first time ever again. So I'm happy with taking 2 months to finish a book on average. The big moods. I do this every year. No one even says big mood anymore, but it's just so funny to me. The big moods for 2024 were emotional, adventurous, lighthearted, funny, reflective, and mysterious. Okay. Cersei, there was a moment in Cersei that I found pretty emotional. I'm glad my mom died by Jeanette McCurdy. Definitely emotional. This is how you lose a time war. Kind of. Girl from the Sea was emotional. I was feeling things when I read that. Esther Parker doesn't fall. Not if it's you first. I don't think I personally called all of these emotional. The one that I can definitely agree is emotional is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. I've been wanting to read this book pretty much since I heard about it. I guess you guys don't know about this part of my life, but before I started YouTube, I was a huge iCarly fan, like in junior high, because I didn't start YouTube until like right out of high school, starting college. Sam Puckett was my favorite character, so I was like particularly drawn to her and Jeanette. It felt like she dropped off the face of the earth, and I didn't really know why. And then when there was the iCarly revival, I knew that she didn't want to get involved. Maybe a lot of it I found out about because of the synopsis of I'm Glad My Mom Died. So this, of course, is Jeanette McCurdy's memoir where she talks about a lot of things that she's gone through in her life. There's like something caught on my hair. OCD, her relationship with food, the iCarly, Sam and Cat, Dan Schneider craziness, which is very NDA. I have to use like weird word choices to work around it, but we all know what she's talking about, which is kind of fun to read / hear. I listened to this on audiobook, by the way. I would recommend listening to this because she reads it. With a lot of memoirs, I think it's best to do an audiobook because you get to hear the person themselves actually reading it. But yeah, I was going to say it feels like kind of exciting, like we're learning something against the will of this big corporation, and it's just really satisfying. And then, of course, a big focus of this book is her relationship with her mother, and it is also the best part of the book. I feel like it's a really accurate portrayal of what it might be like to grow up with a manipulative, narcissistic parent. So she goes on to talk about, the process of kind of grieving the loss of her mom and grieving the fact that she never really had a good mom, and like how does she move on from all this crappy stuff in her life. And that's really nice that it gets a little deeper. Other people who haven't gone through exactly what she went through can still relate to and take important themes from this book. It's been out for a while, but if you still haven't read I'm Glad My Mom Died, you should check it out. So yeah, I had some emotional reads. I had adventurous, I'm sure, like Magnus Chase, Iron Widow. Let's go ahead and talk about Magnus Chase because I did finish Magnus Chase this year. I'm trying to write down like kind of synopses of the books that I read, but when it's a trilogy, it's kind of hard to talk about it without spoiling what happens at the end of book one, right? So I tried to give like a very general synopsis. I wrote Thor's hammer is missing and Loki bargains for its return. Don't remember the logistics of this by arranging a wedding between his daughter Samira and some random Jotun. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I don't remember like how Loki doesn't have the hammer, but he can control whether or not Magnus and his friends get it back. I'm like, I don't remember how that works logistically, but somehow he's like, you can only get the hammer back if my daughter marries a random, like, primordial god kind of thing, which is like a whole thing because Samira is already like, she's like literally supposed to marry this other guy. So it's like, it's a whole thing. And I wrote, so of course they have to go to a bunch of cool places and fight big monsters and not have Samira marry a random guy and get the hammer back. I think that most of like what I have to say about Magnus Chase was said in the previous video. I think that all the like main characters in the series are so lovable right off the bat. Like the plot continues to be good and fun in the same way that Rick Riordan's stuff always has been, but the characters are just so good in this series. And in Hammer of Thor, we meet a new character, which is Alex Fierro. I have been in the Percy Jackson fandom. I've known, right? People will be like, oh, like Percabeth or Fierro Chase, right? Amber has told me that she likes Fierro Chase more than Percabeth. And I'm like, a ship better than Percabeth? I'm skeptical. I do love Alex and Magnus. And in particular, I love Alex. I wrote in my notes, Hearthstone is out, Alex is in, because I used to have Hearthstone as my favorite character, but not the moment Alex stepped on page. The moment she steps on the page, Magnus is very smitten, which is like real cute, but like I have this thing ever since Annabeth, I just get like a little bit bored with hard-headed, strong-willed female characters. Nice thing about Alex is she isn't a chick all the time. So maybe that helps. It wasn't until was this the first time we see Alex as a dude? I'm not sure. But they're on the bridge, the Bifrost Bridge, and he's just acting like such a silly dude. He's giving Leo vibes, and I've always loved Leo. Basically, it's like if you took Annabeth and Leo, two of my favorite Rick Riordan characters, and rolled them into a single person. Because Alex is quite stoic and emotionally reserved, but then also just very silly and unserious sometimes. I also just love the way that her queerness is handled. I was talking to Crystal about this. We said something along the lines of like the way that specifically Alex's gender fluidity is talked about really reminds us of like our own experiences of having queer friends where like you're curious and you have questions for them, but you talk about it in like a very real and honest way. And like if you're open and clearly like seeking to understand, like people are going to be chill about it. And that's kind of the whole relationship. Anytime Magnus has like questions about Alex's existence, this is not an explicitly like this series is like queer as heck. There's just queer characters in the background. Not in the background, but I mean like their queerness is in the background, right? Like the main plot is the main plot, but then it's like, oh yeah, and also Alex is gender fluid and Magnus might be a little bi. And are Hearthstone and Blitz like in a queer platonic partnership? Like what's happening? It just feels like all this stuff just kind of exists. I also said that when we meet Alex Fierro, her initials are on something and it just says AF, and we know that she's a child of Loki. Um, and when I saw this, the first person I thought of was, I believe his name is Amir Fadlan, who was supposed to marry Samira, who is also a child of Loki. So when I saw this, I was like, oh no, is Samira about to experience like every Riordan demigod's worst nightmare, finding out that the love of your life is related to you on the godly side? I got so scared for her, but then AF stood for Alex Fiera, so it was fine. Anyway, I just thought that was really funny. Ship of the Dead, third book, so obviously like Ragnarok's coming. Oh my gosh, right? Loki gets like freed from his chains at the end of Hammer of Thor, spoiler alert, and now he's preparing for Ragnarok. And again, we got to take a big trip with lots of monsters and cool sights. And what I really like about this one is much like in Heroes of Olympus, we're on a big ship with like the whole gang. And I like that like big final adventure with like everyone here. I just think that's really fun. It's nice to see more of oh no, I read these in like March. I'm just searching Ein Herjar. Mallory. She's so great. Half-born. Thomas Jefferson Jr., by the way, he had some really good stuff in the third book. It was nice to see a little bit more of him. That just reminded me, like, I forgot that there's like a whole scene where like Alex gets like, I can't even remember like how we get here, but Alex has to make a big sentient pottery monster. And I love them with every fiber of my being. I'm so obsessed with Pottery Barn. It's kind of like Leo and Festus. My one critique is that although it was really cool to see Sam observing Ramadan, it left her quite absent from the story. So I thought it was really nice that Rick was like, okay, I'm going to have like a Muslim girl for 3 books. This is a part of her life. I think that was a cool bit of representation. As far as I know, it seemed quite accurate, and like he went into the spirituality of it a little bit. I was actually reading this during Ramadan too, so that was really nice to like be learning about it from a book written by a white man, but still, as a lot of my students were observing Ramadan. And I do think it's accurate. Like during Ramadan, people are freaking tired, but it's also unfortunate that by including this representation, it also means that she's not in the story very much. And I just thought that was kind of a bummer. And the end is so good. I think it's really important to me that Alex and Magnus end this series with a fairly unresolved nature to their relationship. I think it makes a lot of sense with Alex's character, and I think not everything has to have a perfect romantic ending where everything's tied off nicely with a little bow, right? So I just thought it was really nice that their relationship is kind of in the air. I mean, we get some fun romantic, we get kisses and stuff, right? But I like that they're not ready to figure it out yet. I think that's really realistic and good representation. And also, the freaking chase space, man, that's everything to me. It ties back so nicely to the beginning of Magnus's arc. All these people who have like experienced homelessness take this and they take the like resources that they have and they give back, and it is so good. It feels really real and grounded in reality, I guess. Like, it was such a satisfying ending. I could not stop thinking about it for like a week. Lighthearted. Taproot was definitely lighthearted. Girl from the Sea. Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about Taproot. Let's do a graphic novel, shake things up a little bit. So on December 31st, I read 2 graphic novels to kind of cram in and try to meet my reading goal. The first one I read was Taproot by Keezy Young, and it is a story about a gardener who, for some reason, can see ghosts. And he's got a few ghost friends, and these ghosts that kind of show up at his gardening shop, and people think he's crazy. They think he's like talking to himself, but he's talking to the ghosts. In particular, there's a ghost named Blue because when he was alive, his hair was blue, but now he's entirely blue because he's a ghost. It's like, ha ha ha. It's such a short book that this feels like a spoiler, but I think it's mentioned early on that Blue is in love with Hamal, and it's clear after a while that Hamal also feels the same way about Blue, but they just feel, especially Blue, is unwilling to pursue anything with Hamal because he thinks that Hamal deserves like a normal life with someone living. It's really sweet and sad, and I think Blue's character is really interesting. He definitely like puts up a front with humor. I liked this book a lot. I thought that the art was really pretty. I thought that the characters were well written. My biggest gripe was the pacing. I think that the first like half of the book is really cute, but so the other kind of plot of the book is that there's something going on where the ghosts keep getting kind of sucked away into this like creepy afterlife world. Big scary death lady arrives and is like, there's a necromancer among us, and like if you can't bring him to me, then like you're gonna be like permanently dead. And they have to figure out, you know, who the necromancer is, who in this universe could possibly be talking to ghosts. And then that gets resolved. And then they go on like a little ghost hunting adventure. And I'm like, wait, what? It felt like the story ended. And then it was like kind of like an epilogue, but a long epilogue. It almost felt like the last third of the story could have been its own like fluffy little sequel or something. So the pacing was kind of weird, but overall it was a really fun little read. The other graphic novel that I read was The Girl from the Sea by Molly Knox Ostertag. This is about a girl named Morgan living on like a little island in Canada. Every now and then, like a couple times throughout her life, she's been in the ocean and she runs into this like beautiful blonde woman. And Morgan knows that she's gay. She has admitted it to herself, but it's very much a secret. But when she meets this beautiful blonde girl, did I say woman? They're like 15. This beautiful blonde girl for the second time, she's like, I'm gonna kiss you, and like they kiss and it's really cute, and she is like, okay, what a fun like weird little dream. And the next day she like wakes up And pretty blonde girl is just like there at her house. So she has to kind of do this thing where she pretends that this is her friend from school, or maybe she's from like out of town. She makes like different lies for different people. Kelty is the blonde girl's name. She does not understand social cues. She immediately tells Morgan, like, hey, yeah, I'm a Selkie and your true love's kiss brought me to land. Now I can walk on land, and like da 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 da. And Morgan's like, okay, you can't tell anyone, we're just friends. Like, she is like terrified, and Kelty's like, I don't understand why we can't just tell people we're in love. Like, she doesn't understand the idea of homophobia because she's from the sea. So it's a whole thing with Morgan kind of learning that she doesn't need to be in control of everything in her life, coming to terms with her sexuality. She's also dealing with her parents going through a divorce, which I think is really well done. Her younger brother is like really angsty all the time, and it's really nice to see their sibling relationship as they're going through this like really hard thing together and coping in very different ways. The art again was really pretty. I just thought that the writing came off like very, very authentically. Like, the characters in this really talk the way I talk. Yeah, I strongly recommend, like, if you're trying to get into graphic novels, definitely check that one out. It was really, really cute. I can't help but notice a similarity to Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail. So let's go ahead and talk about the Bright Falls series. Amber recommended to me Delilah Green Doesn't Care, which is a sapphic love story. And I think I read this in February because I was like, give me some romance. I don't love reading romance, but I mostly read romance in February and July. When's Pride? June, right? I mostly read romance in February and June because I mostly read queer romance. I just feel like the nuance is better than straight romance. Anyway, hit me up with some good straight romance, or don't. So Delilah Green Doesn't Care is about a big city photographer who goes back to her childhood small town to photograph the wedding of her estranged sister. So Delilah is our main character, and it does not get along with her sister Astrid, who was always the favored child of Astrid's mother, Delilah's stepmother. Delilah's kind of the weird countercultural lesbian, whereas Astrid is like continuing on, if I recall correctly. Her father was a designer. Is that correct? There's something in the family that motivates her to be an interior designer, if I recall correctly. So Astrid's like following her family's plans for her. She's very perfect, and Delilah does not like this about her. When Delilah's back in her hometown, she sees a lot of Astrid's friends again, and these friends used to be like not the nicest to Delilah. They would kind of bully her, talk about her behind her back, but Delilah can't help but start developing feelings for Astrid's friend Claire, who it is clarified was like the least mean and maybe even felt bad for Delilah when they were bullying her as a kid. That's kind of like weird to read about. To me, it feels like you traumatized me as a child. It's almost unforgivable, but I think it was handled fairly well. A crush develops, romance ensues. Also, wedding hijinks ensue. Astrid's fiance is a jerk. So they kind of go on, right? Astrid and her friends and Delilah are part of the wedding party. Maybe Delilah might not even formally be part of it. She might just be there to photograph. They go on a camping trip. They go to like fancy dinners and stuff to prepare for the wedding. It's normal wedding stuff, I guess, if you're rich. I wrote that I liked this enough. It was a bit steamy for my taste, and I didn't like how every man is a garbage human. This is something with, especially this book, it gets a little better in Astrid's book, but definitely this is clearly written by, I mean, like, to me, it really was coming off like this is written by a lesbian who hangs around other women primarily and has like got this idea in her head that men are all misogynistic jerks. And I just, not to be not like other girls, but it's just not true. Like, I think that it does a disservice to men and feminism and overturning the patriarchy if we act like men are inherently bad. So that's just frustrating for me to read. One of the guys who was kind of a jerk, like, comes around at the end. The other main guy just is a jerk, and it's fine. Oh, I didn't even mention, right? So it's Astrid's fiance, and like all of Astrid's friends know that he's a jerk, and they're kind of subtly trying to get them broken up, which is just, it's fun. It's like the Parent Trap where they're like putting sugar water in her bug spray so that the mosquitoes are attacking her, like that kind of thing. It's really fun. These guys are bad, but I don't really know why they're bad. And I feel like knowing why someone's bad is important. My other big critique is that I said, I don't like the way Ashley Herring Blake uses NBs and POC as props to show the white main character's wokeness. And then in parentheses, I put there is some growth in this area in the next book. But all the main characters are white, queer, cis women. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it bothers me that, like, Delilah will talk about how she loves to photograph queer couples of color and like present the diversity of, is she from New York? I can't remember, but she loves to like have so much diversity in her photography, but then her friends are all cis white ladies. Delilah talks about like when she realized that she was only into women and femfolk, and I'm like, where are the femfolk? I don't see her feeling attraction towards anyone except for cis women. So it's like, why did you even say femfolk if you're not going to show me that she's, you know what I mean? They do show at the very end her working with a black woman. But again, it's just like it feels like they're props. And in Astrid's book, it starts out a little bit worse because again, Jordan, Astrid's love interest, cis white woman, and every morning she reads these. Do you read tarot cards? She uses these tarot cards featuring POC women and femfolk on these tarot cards. And that's like the majority of non-white, non-cis women that we see. It is on these tarot cards, and that feels weird to me. But let me come back to that because it does get better in Astrid's book. I just want to also wrap up Delilah's book by saying, I said, that being said, Delilah is a fun character. The romance is cute, and I liked watching Delilah mend her relationship with her sister. I think my favorite part of the book was the sister family relationship stuff that was going on, and destroying Astrid's engagement. I thought that was really fun. So when Astrid Parker doesn't fail, surprise, surprise, Delilah and her friends were successful in destroying Astrid's engagement. So now Astrid kind of feels like everything is falling apart in her life. She's always done everything that would make her mom proud. And now she's not marrying this guy that she was supposed to marry, but she has a good opportunity. She's an interior designer and she's just had her big break to redesign this house that she's loved since she was a child on this big HGTV style show inside America. And she's like, okay, I'm going to turn my life around. Everything's going to be perfect. Everything has to be perfect. This is how Astrid is. And the lead carpenter on her show starts making her feel a little like, wait, have I been into girls this whole time? So the lead carpenter is that character I mentioned earlier, Jordan, and she's very out and proud. She's pretty flirtatious with Astrid, and it makes Astrid uncomfortable, but like kind of in a good way, you know? I wrote, it's a good story about letting go of control and coming to terms with your sexuality. I think Astrid has to recognize that she's been kind of bi this whole time and unwilling to admit that to herself because it didn't fit in with her mom's plans for her. I wrote that I really enjoyed this way more than Delilah. I relate to Astrid, but I also found Jordan to be a really fun character. No, I don't have time for that. Oh my goodness. Okay, well, I will just quickly say that when I read the first chapter, there's like a preview at the end of Delilah's book. I was reading Astrid's plans for this house, and I was like, these are the most boring cookie cutter plans. She's gonna take this beautiful Victorian home and make it beige. I was so annoyed. So when Jordan comes into the book and she's like, I want to preserve the character of this house, I'm like, thank you. Oh my, thank you. I was actually hoping when I read the preview, I was like, I feel like I might hate this book, but there's a chance that Astrid is going to learn that this is not the best way to redesign this house. And that was what happened. And I was so happy because I was just going to be like so annoyed if I had to read 300 books of let's make this house beige. That was like where I was like fully on Jordan's side, even though I related to Astrid's personality more. In terms of design choices, I was like, I'm begging you to put like an ounce of character in this house. Yeah, and I put update on NB and POC characters. I'm also going to say update on like straight cis male characters or cis male characters. I don't think he's straight. Jordan has a twin brother, and he's a pretty good guy. He actually becomes friends. Like, he has a pretty good relationship with his sister. There were two fairly major NB and POC characters in this book. So there is the problem is I don't remember their names. So there's that. They weren't on page a lot. Like, they definitely were background characters. The woman running the show is definitely like a feminist, maybe lesbian, Latina woman, if I recall correctly. And then a noteworthy camera person is an NB Black person. And it's cool to see, especially the NB person there, just like seeing they them pronouns being used. And the director lady does end up having kind of some important stuff happen, maybe. She more exists to like get the plot moving, to kind of create like friction between what needs to happen on camera for this HGTV show and what's actually going on between Astrid and Jordan. NB character, whose name I also don't remember, I'm so sorry, they're kind of just there. I feel like they're just above the tarot cards, you know? So it's like we're getting this representation, but I'm like, Ashley Herring Blake, can they please have just like a friend? But it was a step up. I think the representation got better and treated those people more as humans, even if they are secondary in the story. So those are the lighthearted books that I read. What did I read that was funny? Magnus? Yep. Okay. Rick Riordan and the Astrid Bright Falls books. I read mostly medium-paced books. What did I say was slow-paced? Let's talk about something boring. I listened to the Radium Girls on audiobook at the gym. This is a nonfiction book that kind of takes the perspectives of women who worked in the radium dial factories in the like World War I era and kind of fictionalizes their stories, but it's still very much a nonfiction book, and talks about how their bosses kind of gaslit them when they started getting sick and when women started dying. The bosses and the radium industry, which was thriving and making a lot of money because it was the hip new thing, they would say that these women had like STDs. They would come up with other reasons why these women are like losing limbs. I wrote that this was a good, interesting story, but wow, is it long and dry. It's just very nonfiction. I don't think I could have, if I had to read it, I might not have been able to finish it because it is very just matter of fact. Like, the beginning is interesting to see like how the hints of radium poisoning started to appear. And it's very interesting at the end when the women start finally getting some semblance of justice. But in the middle, it's like, now this girl died. Now this girl lost a limb. And it just like, it's tragic, but it does just get repetitive and kind of boring to read. It's a story worth telling, but yeah, not the most engaging. Oh my goodness. I read some long books this year. 67% were 300 to 500 pages. I read a few that were very short. My graphic novels, This Is How You Lose the Time War, Linguistics in Pursuit of Justice. I'll come back for those. But I read 4 books that were 500 pages plus. All of these long books were really good too. Let me talk about American Gods because I don't really know what category this falls under. So Amber was doing a reading group and she invited me to join her when they were reading American Gods by Neil Gaiman. I really enjoyed this while I read it, but as I sat down last night and tried to like make my notes for this video, I realized that I don't remember very much about what I read. So I used Storygraph to like remind me of what I read. I forgot that I had these here. I have been so subconsciously avoiding talking about the books that I actually own. That's really interesting. So this book is about a guy whose wife has mysteriously died in a car accident. And this is what it says on the back, he gets recruited to be bodyguard, driver, and errand boy for the enigmatic trickster Mr. Wednesday, who I've been reading Magnus Chase when I read this. So I heard Mr. Wednesday and I was like, okay, Woden, like immediately Odin, Woden. Woden's Day. So begins Shadow's dark and strange road trip, one that introduces him to a host of eccentric characters, all of whom are like based on a god from various religions, spiritualities, faiths, etc. It's really interesting. I would say, like, what is the plot? I don't know. I struggled. I mean, like, maybe I'm just a ding dong, but I struggled to follow the plot. I feel like, even like during the book club conversation and in reviews and stuff that I see of this, people mostly talk about how this is an exploration of like what makes America America. And I would say that is more what it feels like. More than having a plot, it's about going to different places and communities across America and just showcasing what a mishmash of cultures and stuff it is. I did enjoy seeing the different gods, and I really liked Neil Gaiman's writing style. It's not like a flowery writing style, it's very straightforward, but even in like the fewest, simplest words, he'll make you laugh. And that's fun. But yeah, overall, I enjoyed this book, even though most of what I remember about it is like a vibe, right? Like American road trip sprinkled with mythology vibe. It was good. Fiction, nonfiction. I mostly read fiction as usual. So the other nonfiction book that I read this year was Linguistics in Pursuit of Justice. This was a Christmas gift for last Christmas, I think. And I started it in March and read it slowly throughout the year. It was kind of my go-to, like, if my students are doing like a writing workshop and I don't want to just like be on my computer while they write, but I don't want to be hovering over their necks the whole time, I'll read this. This is a book by John Baugh. Maybe you've heard of his famous study. He is a Black linguist at Stanford University now. I'm not sure if he was at Stanford when he did this study, but he did this experiment where he would call it's like 1980, and he would call the like rental agencies or whatever you call it, like people who were renting out apartments, and ask in either like Black English or standard American English, or I think he also did Chicano English because he grew up surrounded by that and felt like he could put on that accent quite well. He would ask them if they had any apartments available or any homes available, and basically found out that, especially depending on the area in California, these places would definitely discriminate just on the way he sounded, right? So kind of showing that accent discrimination is a thing. Racism is not just based on the way someone looks. There are other features that people can consider to discriminate, and wound up like making, I think, a pretty big like impact in housing discrimination laws. So he talks in this book about that study and some work that he's done like in court as a forensic linguist. So there was a lot of really good information in here that was new to me. There was also a lot of information in here that was not particularly new to me, and that's why I decided to give it 4.5 stars. I think that in this book, at least, he really over-explains himself, which I guess is common in academia. You want to make sure that everyone's on the same page. So it was just kind of like, especially because I was like trying to finish this book before December 31st, like I was just like, oh my gosh, I know these things. So I was getting a little frustrated. But then he brings it back. He talks about 5 themes of justice. And I thought that was good. So there are some really good moments in here. Obviously, there was a lot of stuff that I found really useful for like my own research, my own teaching, because I did mark this book a lot. I just feel like the average person who picks up a book called Linguistics in Pursuit of Justice is going to be familiar with a lot of the information in here. However, the stuff that was useful was really, really useful. And if I weren't such a completionist, I probably would have just picked and chosen the chapters that felt relevant to me, and I would have maybe skipped over chapters 9 and 10. But yeah, I think it was a really good read and helped me see a perspective of the relationship between linguistics and justice that I think about the promoting social justice and dialectal diversity in my ESL classrooms. I haven't seen a lot of that perspective of how it applies to like court cases. So that was really interesting to see. And then we have genres. So I think this is a thing now. Fantasy is definitely my biggest genre. Doesn't even surprise me anymore. I will quickly talk about Assassin's Quest, the last book in the Farseer trilogy. So Farseer trilogy was kind of my first big girl fantasy series. And just like with Magnus Chase, I feel like if I talk too much about what happens in the third book, it's going to be a spoiler for the previous books. So over the course of the trilogy, we see Fitz, our main character, go from being a little boy to an adolescent, like, young man, and now he's just some dude. I mean, I guess he's still a young man. I don't know how old he is, but he's like fully a man. At the end of the second book, some crazy things happen. So our main character is presumed dead, and the guy who is supposed to inherit the royal bloodline, Verity, is also presumed dead, but Fitz really, really feels like he's not dead, or he can bring him back, or something, because we really don't want Regal to take the throne. And that's pretty much what the book revolves around. Because of his magic, he can hear Verity's voice, but it's like, is he just like some spirit? Is he in hiding? Like, what exactly is going on? Where is his voice coming from? He's trying to track him down, but also Verity can't really talk with Fitz very much, because if he does talk with him, he risks being seen by the bad guys who also have the same magical powers. So that's basically the plot of it, trying to bring Verity back. There is something really cool that happens at the end. I don't really want to give too much away. It involves dragons, and that part was just really cool. Like, towards the end, I could not stop reading. And also the Fool plays a big role in this book, and I love the Fool. I'm a fool for the Fool. It was fun to see Fitz like kind of come of age. I guess the second book is more of the coming of age, but this book, he has a lot of moments where he'll look at himself and he'll be like, "Whoa, I'm a man now." And I don't know, it's just kind of cool to see. So yeah, it was a very good end to this series. I noticed that I think the first book I maybe gave 4 or 4.5 stars, because I thought it was good, but I wasn't quite sold on the universe. By the time I got to the end of the series, I was really, really into it. Gave this book 5 stars. And I was thinking about this because also under fantasy, oh, I have this book. This book is not orange. Be right back. Because also under fantasy is The Final Empire, or as my book simply calls it, Mistborn, the first book in the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. And this was really interesting to end one fantasy trilogy and start another. I don't think this is actually a trilogy, but I have the first 3 books, so it feels like a trilogy, because I noticed myself feeling kind of similarly about this book as I did with Assassin's Apprentice when I started the Farseer trilogy, which is, I see a lot of potential here, but I feel like there is room for this series to grow, and I'm excited to see that happen. So Mistborn is a book with a lot of different perspectives, but I would say the main perspective that we focus on is Vin, who is a young girl. She is a Ska, which is like this very oppressed race in this universe. So she's a Ska girl who discovers that she has the power of allomancy, which is the entire magic system of this book. Basically, the magic is based on metals, and by consuming different metals, the characters can do different things. Like, they can push away from metals, they can pull themselves towards metals. Certain metals heighten your senses, so you can hear something from very far away or see something maybe more clearly than you could before. She discovers that she has these powers, and another major character, Kelsier, takes her into this rebellion group that he's leading and teaches her how to wield her powers. Kelsier is born of a nobleman, but he's trying to stand up to the noblemans and stand up for the Ska. He's that classic kind of character that is a little aloof, a little smug, definitely countercultural. Kelsier is really fun to read. We also have, oh no, what's that one guy's name? Sazed. Sazed is a Terraceman, and Terracemen have a power that's similar to allomancy, but kind of like more intense. They're kind of similar to like Vulcans in Star Trek, where they're like super strong and powerful, but they're also like very reserved and serious. I really like Sazed's character. And the other big thing that Vin gets to do is she has normally acted as kind of a bandit spy, but as part of Kelsier's plan, he wants her to go undercover at these noblemen's balls. So she's spying, but not in the way that she has in the past. She has to blend in by being girly. And I can't lie, I hated that at first because this is a woman written by a man. And just sometimes it was like, okay, we get it. She's different. She doesn't want to wear makeup and a dress. But I honestly think that it was done quite tastefully. There was even a part about like someone having to help her down from the carriage. The line was something about, noble women don't help themselves out of their carriages, not because they can't, but because the dresses make it really difficult. And it's like, oh, that's like, I think that's a good line and a good like commentary on how like the women aren't helpless. It is the societal expectations that make them helpless. Good observation from a man. That's crazy. But yeah, so she goes undercover at these balls and maybe starts to fall in love with a nobleman. Uh-oh. So there's a little bit of romance, and I honestly think the romance was fun. Maybe it's because I wasn't sure if I trusted him or not, so it was hard for me to like let my guard down and want them to happen. So I wasn't like absorbed by the romance, but from a plot perspective, it definitely created some interesting stuff there. As I've been kind of getting into writing myself, they always tell you show, don't tell. People say that like adverbs aren't always the best because like why would you say he said angrily when you could describe what his anger looks like. However, that results in like a lot of words, and I think that's why it's maybe stereotypical for like women's writing to be very flowery. This guy, he treads the line for me because there is a lot of people saying things angrily, doing things contently, just a lot of just like he did this, he looked mad, and it's like, oh, can you describe how he looked mad? Like, I don't love his writing style. Amber mentioned that this was like his debut, and I gotta say, for a debut novel, really, really good stuff. And the thing is, even if his writing style is quite dry and straightforward, I love the world building. I think the magic system is really, really well done. Really good twist at the end. I'm not going to give anything away, but it has a really good ending. It was overall really, really good, and I'm excited to read the next one. As always, LGBTQIA+ is another. As the A, I'm allowed to go. QIA+ was my second biggest category. 9 books, most of which I have already talked about. Okay, let's start with the queerest of the queer, or at least the book that was marketed as very queer. I have thoughts about The Phoenix Keeper. So Amber and I wanted to read this book together. Oh my goodness, we like heard about it on TikTok and we were like, this is going to be so good. It's so it takes place in a zoo for magical creatures, a little bit Newt Scamander, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, with some sapphic romance. Especially when that hotshot Griffin Keeper happens to be her arch rival from college, Luciana, an insufferable know-it-all with the face of a goddess who's convinced that Ayla's beloved Phoenix would be better off as a performer than as a passive conservation exhibit. So on the back, it's like, okay, so are these girls gonna like kiss or what? I was not content with the level of gayness in this book. Ayla takes a very long time to realize and admit that she might possibly have feelings for Luciana. It doesn't happen until I want to say halfway through the book. For the first half of the book, she has a crush on this guy. It's like frustrating to read because the guy isn't mentioned on the back of the book at all. I love some bi representation, but like when I'm reading her crushing on this guy, I'm like, I don't care. Get to the chick, that this enemies to lovers thing that I read about on the back. I don't care about Justin Bieber, normal, bland it's just like the most bland guy that she has a crush on. So the first like half of the book is just like really boring. Every time I check in with Amber and see if she's made progress, she has not, because the first half of this book is just really boring. Once it gets gay, it's good. Ayla learns a lot from Luciana, and Luciana learns a little bit from Ayla, and that's good to see. I think that the mythical creature stuff is really fun. Ayla is quite autistic coded, and therefore we see a lot of the animals through like a pretty textbooky lens. So we're often introduced to random like details about the animals that feel irrelevant to what we're talking about. I remember the TikTok that we heard this from said that she was autistic coded. So like people are seeing this, right? So I think that's what the author's going for, but I don't think it's always, I don't know. It's like, how do you make that true to her character, but still interesting to an audience? Because after a while, I just started skimming past the kind of info dumps about the animals, and it made me like maybe not enjoy that world as much. My other gripe about the fantasy world is that it was strangely just the real world with different names. We see that her parents run an Irish Mexican fusion restaurant. It's an Irish Mexican fusion restaurant, but they call it a Movasi whatever fusion restaurant. But it's like, it's just, the food is just Mexican food with potatoes. Like, it's Irish Mexican fusion. So it's really interesting that it almost feels like she wrote this story in a real world where mythical creatures live among us style, and someone maybe gave her feedback that was like, make this a cool fantasy land, and she just like control F replaced every mention of Ireland with Movasi or whatever. I'm not even sure if that's the right place. The other issue that I had with this book is that although Ayla is a good character and Luciana is fairly well developed, no one else is a very well developed character in my opinion. I wished we could have seen more of Tanya. Like, it just really was taking me off for the first like 300 pages that Tanya really just seems to be there to serve Ayla's plot. However, Tanya does stick up for herself around like page 300 or something. She kind of sticks up for herself and is like, dude, I'm doing my own projects. Like, I'm stressed. You're kind of a bad friend. And I'm like, thank you. Oh my goodness. I thought we weren't going to say it. So I'm glad that she said that. But also, it felt like things went back to normal after that. It's like, again, if you're going to have an autistic coded character and then you're going to make the whole lesson, oh, you're bad and self-absorbed, that didn't feel like it was handled with a lot of nuance. So it's like, although I wanted her to pay more attention to Tanya and like be a good friend for her, I don't feel like that minor plot line that went on was handled very well. So yeah, it just felt like some of the characters could have been more fleshed out. It just takes a long time to get to what you expected it to be. And once you do, it's good. Yeah, under young adult, I have a book that I listened to on audio, Not If I See You First, which is a story about a blind high schooler whose father has just died. Her world has been kind of like turned upside down. So she's dealing with grief, she's dealing with boy drama, and of course she is like doing everything through the lens of like how her blindness impacts her life. And she wants to join the track team, but she is faster than anyone who can be her guide. So I thought this was good. I said I liked it enough. Parker was definitely written by a grown man trying to sound like a teen girl in 2015. Like, every time she had like a stupid thought that was maybe like a little bit anxious, she would be like, but my troll brain says to blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh my gosh. It was just kind of cringy, but I think it would have been cute in 2015. I said the blind rep seemed good, but I don't think that the author, Eric Lindstrom, is blind. I did try to find information about like his process and stuff, and I just couldn't find that anywhere through Google. So I'm curious about like what kind of research he did. It seemed consistent with like what I know about blindness from like Molly Burke, and it seemed like good representation, but yeah, kind of, I guess it wasn't own voices. So it's like, how much can I trust? these ideas and how much are like you just and what you think blind people are like. But yeah, it seemed good to me. Gosh, there's a lot of good stuff under this. Young adult. Let's go ahead and talk about Iron Widow. So I have not been subscribed to Shirin J. Zhao. I don't think. I don't really subscribe to people so much anymore because the YouTube algorithm is so strong. But I have definitely watched a lot of their videos, and I've liked their content for a while. I was aware that they had written this book, and then I had a friend who like recommended it and was like, "Oh yeah, it's like by like the person who wrote it also was like really big on TikTok." I don't have TikTok, but I'm like, yeah, I know. I've watched their YouTube videos. Iron Widow takes place in a dystopian China where boys pair up with girls to pilot these like big chrysalis mech suits to fight aliens who are also in giant mech suits, which sounded like pretty different from what I would normally go for. I mean, I liked Voltron, but I'm not a big like mech girly. So I think that was one thing that was making me kind of feel like I don't know if I'm going to like this very much. Our main character Zetian, she becomes a concubine to like kind of serve for this chrysalis system. But really she has an ulterior motive to kill the male pilot that she wants to be paired with because he is responsible for the death of her sister. She does end up killing this guy and surprisingly lives through the experience because when the boy and girl are bonded in the chrysalis, the boy is like sapping off of the girl's energy. A lot of girls are dying in this process. And everyone's really surprised that not only has she killed the guy, but she also lived to tell the tale. And that makes her an Iron Widow. So then she kind of has to do the Hunger Games thing where everyone's like so scared of her that they're like, look, ooh, the Iron Widow, she's so rare. And they pair her up with another guy, or I can't remember exactly how she ends up paired with this other guy. But he's very strong, and the people behind these chrysalis fights try to put her on display like she and her partner are this really cool power couple, and she has to kind of like do what they want, but she also wants to take down the system, right? It was easy for me to forget that this is actually based on the story of a real empress, which I think I still need to go watch Shirin's video about the actual empress because she sounds really freaking cool. Because I sometimes forgot that this was based on a real empress, I would be reading this and I would be like, what is this main character doing? She's crazy. Like, I would just not understand her motives. And I do wonder if there's more that could have been done to help us understand her as a character. But that being said, I think like the real woman that this character is based off of just maybe had some strange, she just did some strange things, and it's kind of a strange story. And the other thing that I really liked about this book was the portrayal of a poly relationship, which I don't think I've ever read a book with a poly relationship in it, which is crazy. I don't know a lot about being poly, but I feel like it was presented in what felt like a very like equal way for everyone involved in the relationship. You can really see that everyone cares about each other in this relationship in different ways, and they're all kind of getting something out of their relationship with everyone involved. And you kind of start to look at it and you're like, I felt like I got it. So that was really cool to see. And also just like all of the relationships, I was like, yes, yes. Especially Shimin and what was the other guy's name? There was a Z. Did it start with a Z? I can't remember. But watching them, like watching from Setien's perspective as the two guys that she was in a love triangle with kind of started to like each other was so satisfying. So that was really fun. It was just like a really interesting, like different kind of relationship that we don't see a lot in books. And I thought that was really, really well done. And then I also want to talk about Legendborn. Oh my goodness, do I want to talk about Legendborn? This was the first book that Amber and I read this year, and oh my goodness, it was everything. So in this book, our main character, Bree, discovers that she has magical powers. She somehow gets caught up in this secret society kind of college frat style thing that is based on the magic system, right? So if you have the magic, I think I can't even remember who. I read this way back in February or March, but someone else with the magic is like, hey, I see you, you see me, you should pursue this secret society thing. Only to find out that the society has some pretty racist roots, and the whole magic system has some pretty racist stuff going on. Like, so there's this whole secret society, and it's all white people. It's all only ever been white people. But Bree encounters this her her mom has just died, and her dad sets her up with a therapist, and the therapist turns out to also have this kind of magic stuff going on, and she's a Black woman, and it's like, okay, there's something systemic going on here, right? It also seems like this magic stuff that's going on somehow ties back to the death of Bree's mom. So she starts pursuing membership in the secret society with kind of an ulterior motive to figure out what the heck happened to her mom. And as she pursues membership in this society, she ends up in a little love triangle, of course. And it's got everything. Like, as I was reading this, I was like, holy cow, if I read this in 8th grade, I would have been so obsessed. The world building is like Harry Potter level. The writing style is phenomenal. I wrote in my notes, the way it talks about race is so good. More microaggressions, less hello, yes, I am the big evil racist white guy. So this is a gripe that I have with books that talk about race, and I've been reflecting on this a little bit more. Several books that I've read, I don't like when like we're not really like addressing the root of the problem sometimes, and I've decided that that's okay. Not every book about race has to be written for me, a white person, trying to understand like little microaggressions and how I can be a better ally, right? Sometimes you just need to say, hey, look, white people are like kind of awful, and I can just go, yeah, yeah. They're more personifications of the idea of whiteness. In this book, the characters are characters. So we have like microaggressions, right? We have people touching Bree's hair, and she's like, but don't do that. I like hardly know you. That was just nice to see. I think again, like for a teenager reading this, there are a lot of like really good moments that I think would be valuable. So I really liked that. That being said, there are some pretty bad white people too. But I think that like again, like it's just worded so much better. It doesn't feel like they're just racist for the sake of being racist. Like it actually feels like we understand why they think that they have to like protect themselves or like whatever they believe. Again, this was like February, March that I read this, but I just felt like there was more nuance to the racist characters, which is like, again, it always sounds bad when I say that, but it's like, how else are we going to fight the problems in the world if we don't understand the sources of them? So that's how I feel. The other thing I was going to say was I have thoughts about the love triangle. Right now, by the end of this book, I feel like I'm Team Cell. Although from the cover of the 3rd book, it looks like things aren't going to go very well with Cell. But I just don't feel like Nick seems remorseful enough about his dad's garbage politics. And I'm like, if you're going to date someone, Bree, I need you to know your worth. Because if you're going to date this guy, I need him to like really apologize for like for the stuff that he's been complicit in. I think like I can see a path where it feels like he deserves a relationship with her, but right now it doesn't feel like he deserves a relationship with her. So I'm not a huge Nick fan. But we'll see how the rest of the series progresses. I believe there are 3 books in the series, and I'm so reading the 2nd one this year. So I really, really loved this. Okay, so lots of young adult science fiction. The first thing I think of when I think of science fiction is I read the 3rd Star Trek Destiny book, Lost Souls, and I don't remember this very much at all. Every time I read one of these, it just doesn't stick with me. This is another book where the writing style is like quite dry and a lot of maybe like he said angrily, and it's just like kind of boring to read. Captain Erica Hernandez, who is like an original character, has escaped the Kaliar, these like aliens that exist. They're almost godlike. So she has escaped. She's aboard Riker's ship. And then I put also the Borg are attacking. Erica uses her Kaliar powers to beat the Borg. I don't really remember, but like while she's with these godlike aliens, she learns to, or maybe they give her the ability to, I believe you can like connect with someone, like almost read their mind, see stuff from like really far away. It's just like you almost are omnipotent. So she uses that to beat the Borg. Spoiler alert, I guess. For my impressions, I wrote that I don't remember this very well, but I enjoyed it, especially toward the end. I did think the stuff where like everything kind of came together and the stuff with the Kaliar worked in the fight against the Borg. Like I thought that was cool. I liked that we got to see some Picard perspective, especially when we're dealing with the Borg. It was really cool to see like his perspective as someone who has been somewhat assimilated. It was just neat to see like a first person or well a third person limited perspective from Picard. And I thought the relationship between Erica and the Kaliar guy, Inix, I think was his name, was cute. And that's really all I wrote. Honestly, I don't want to linger on that one too much because it's kind of niche and I just thought it was okay. I gave it 4 stars. Also under science fiction, oh my goodness, The Last Quintista was maybe this was my favorite book of the year. This was definitely my favorite book of the year. So in The Last Quintista, the Earth has been destroyed by a comet, but our main character Petra and her family are some of the lucky few who get to board a ship that's going to escape Earth and go to a new planet. But then the ship gets kind of hijacked by another group called the Collective. I felt like the name was a little uninspired, but they get hijacked by the Collective. This all happens while everyone's in stasis. So for whatever reason, when Petra was supposed to go into stasis, the gel or whatever like wasn't making her fall asleep. I still don't really understand the lore here, but for whatever reason, everyone else who wakes up does not have any memories of Earth. But Petra, I guess because the stasis stuff didn't work on her properly, does have memories of Earth. And conveniently, she has always really wanted to be a storyteller because her abuela told her all these beautiful stories growing up and she wanted to tell stories like her. So she starts to tell stories to the other kids. And we find that while Petra was in stasis, like generations have passed. Her parents are gone. She can't find her brother. She's kind of brought back with these other kids. And the technology works on all of these kids. So like the Collective who like hijacked everything and whatnot, like it's kind of like the Borg in Star Trek. The kids live to serve the Collective. They eat disgusting, bland food. They're just there to work and sleep, right? But before they go to sleep each night, Petra's like, I'm going to tell you guys a story. Very well written. I thought the writing was really beautiful. The metaphors of coming to a new land and having to fit in and having your culture erased were just really, really good. That stuff always makes me feel really emotional because I think about that stuff with my students a lot. The characters were good. This is also a book that I would have really, really liked when I was younger, but as an adult, I enjoyed it a lot. Also under science fiction, I have This Is How You Lose the Time War. This book has been hyped up on YouTube for like such a long time. I can't lie, when I started this book, I didn't like it. It felt like it was trying too hard to be cerebral. I was really anticipating it having some weird time travel thing where you have to remember what happened like 30 pages ago and tie it back to what's happening now and da 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 da. It wasn't really like that. As I realized that that wasn't happening, I got more comfortable and just kind of relaxed and read the book. And then I liked it more. So this book is about 2 time travelers, Red and Blue, who go throughout space and time and try to ensure that things happen in a certain way by like kind of setting off chain reactions. They have to be there to make sure that the right seed gets planted in the right soil to make the tree that's gonna cause this to happen and da 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 da. And they kind of have a rivals to lovers kind of thing going on where they I think at first they're kind of supposed to kill each other, but it turns into a flirtationship. And then because they work for two different agencies, they really can't risk having their bosses find out that they are in love with each other. They write each other these letters. The entire book is prose letter. Prose letter. They're translated into English for our sake, but really they're reading the grain of the wood on that tree that I mentioned earlier, or they're reading a message in Morse code from the way that the rain falls on a da-da. Like, it's kind of, I don't know, it's very romantic. There's just a lot of that kind of stuff happening in this book. But even though the theme is time travel, it really is kind of just a love story. There's not a lot of crazy sci-fi wildness going on. So it was good. I read 5 romance books. I was really shocked to see this stat, but now I feel like I know what these are going to be. Yeah, the Bright Falls book, Girl from the Sea, This Is How You Lose the Time War. I knew there was going to be a romance element, but it was much stronger than I thought it would be. I will say though, it was really well written. Not If I See You First, that's a romance, sure. So yeah, kind of a pretty good amount of romance for me this year. I thought that said Mardi Gras, middle grade. Middle grade, okay. Percy, yeah. So obviously I had to read the new Percy Jackson book, Wrath of the Triple Goddess, which came out towards the end of September, but I was like, no. I'm waiting until October to read this because, I mean, look at this thing. Oh my gosh. This is a Halloweeny book if I've ever seen one. It's so nice. And I know that it takes place on Halloween. So I was like, I gotta read this. I actually finished it on Halloween, if I recall correctly. So it was really satisfying. So I have notes for this one, I think. No, I was getting sick of taking notes. So I wrote blah, blah, Hecate, blah, blah, Halloween. Hecate, the triple goddess, shows up to Percy and she's like, hey, you need those recommendation letters to go to college? I have something that I would like you to do. And he's like, okay, great. And she wants him to pet sit for her for a week while she goes and indulges in Halloween celebrations around the world because she is the goddess of witchcraft and people are celebrating her for Halloween. So while she's gone, Percy, Grover, and Annabeth pet sit for her eels and also her hellhound Hecuba and her polecat Gale. As we read, we learn that, or I guess if you know about the mythology, you already know this, but I don't know that much. We learn that Hecuba and Gale were real people that have been forced into the bodies of a dog and a polecat. So we get to know their stories and it's really interesting. It actually winds up being kind of deeper than I thought it would be. In general, I don't want to give away a lot about this book, but I will say I liked this a lot. I really liked it more than Chalice. I think that the character work in this one is really good. When I read Chalice, I felt like Rick felt like he was kind of struggling to get back into Percy's character. I think I mentioned this last year that there were a few times where Percy felt more like Apollo and not like Percy. He was referring to himself in the third person a lot. It was weird. It just didn't quite feel like Percy. He feels like Percy here. And I also feel like we really got a good moment from each of the main 3. We have a good moment with Percy kind of reflecting on his relationship with Annabeth. We have a good moment with Grover kind of worrying about what's going to happen when his 2 friends move across the country to go to college and he's still in New York. And we have a really good moment with Annabeth kind of thinking about kind of her own strengths and weaknesses and her priorities and stuff that I thought was really good. So it was just nice that we got to see some depth from each of the main characters and from the pets that were supposed to be pet sitting were quite deep. So it was just a lot of good character work in this one, and I love character work. Rick really took advantage of the fact that this is a fluffier, more relaxed series, because when you aren't fighting a war that determines the fate of the entire world, you can sit and think about your feelings, and I thought that was really nice. I think the only reason I took away 0.25 was because it did kind of drag in the middle, but other than that, I mean, the character work, it was just so good. This was another book that was living rent-free in my mind, even when I wasn't reading it. Let's see, I read contemporary, literary. Okay, sure. I don't really know what literary fiction means, but yeah, I read some literary fiction this year. I think Circe doesn't need like a lot of explanation. It's just a retelling of the Greek myth of Circe. It goes through her experiences growing up with the primordial gods, getting banished to her island, which I think is the thing that she's most known for, Circe's Island. She's got some flirtation ships with like Hermes and Odysseus, and she raises a son, and then things get kind of crazy with her son. I guess if you don't know the story, I won't spoil it for you, but I was surprised because I don't know Greek mythology. I thought it was really good. Maybe I don't need to spend a lot of time on this one because, like, it is a story that exists. But what I will say is that I feel like the author, Madeline Miller, had a really good writing style. I think there were even some moments that made me emotional, which I wasn't expecting. I think I was expecting it to be pretty cut and dry. I really liked that the tone makes sense for these, like, godly, very formal speech, but there is still humor woven in. And I thought that was really well done. It made me feel like I could actually get into just regular old Greek mythology, not Percy Jackson, just like normal mythology. So yeah, this book's been out for a while. I finally got around to reading it. And yeah, if you still haven't read Circe or anything by Madeline Miller, I would recommend it. Also under literary is Daisy Jones and the Six. Both of these books I read while my family was on vacation in Florida, and I was just like reading them on the beach. I would just like read these books and lose track of time, and it was fantastic. Daisy Jones and the Six is a documentary style story. Instead of having really any exposition, everything is presented as interviews with the main characters. So it's a story of this kind of free-spirited singer and her collaboration with this band called The Six. And it's very 70s. There's like drugs, alcohol, addiction, romance, music, and it's just I want to say it's a good time. There are parts of it that feel really good, but then there are also parts of it that are really tragic. It's an emotional roller coaster. The format was innovative and allowed for some really neat moments. Like you start to notice that certain characters are mentioned by the people that they're interviewing, but you never hear from these characters themselves. So you start to wonder, like, did they die? Did they like quit the band and they just didn't want to be interviewed? Like, what's going on here? The way it was set up really like made you have these realizations that like wouldn't normally work in another format. Each character had a distinctive voice, which I feel like is especially hard to do because there's no Daisy had red hair and blue eyes. Dooby dooby doo. Like there was nothing where like she could just describe. So it would have to be like one of the characters would say, and this was that time where Billy was always wearing that freaking jean jacket. He never left the house without that thing. All the patches on it and da ba da ba da. So many things that would not normally make sense through dialogue. She somehow made it work. I was very impressed. The characters are all like quite unique. But we get to see their perspectives really, really well. So when they butt heads, and they butted heads a lot, I felt like I could understand like everyone's perspective when there was a disagreement. I know that this got turned into, I think, a Netflix show, and I kind of want to go watch it and see how it compares to the book. But the book is really, really good. Poetry. Sure. So I haven't talked about the Poet X. I love Elizabeth Acevedo. When I was a Spanish major in college, we listened to one of her poems. I believe it's just called Afro Latina. And she talks about being Afro Latina, and I had never even thought about that intersection before. So one, it was just like a really cool poem about how race and language and culture intersect. And that just hadn't been part of my Spanish education yet. And it was like a really important moment for me. But also, oh my goodness, just the rhyme scheme and the word choice. It was all just like really, really well done, and it just stuck with me. I still think about this poem like regularly. It's so good. So this book is about an Afro-Latina teenage girl living in Harlem. You know, it's a coming of age story. She's dealing with body image issues and like some like body shaming, kind of slut shaming from her mom and from I don't want to say friends, but like from the adults in her life, just because she's a big girl. And she's like, what do you want me to do? I have boobs. She's dealing with romance. There is kind of like a little romance going on, but she has to hide it from her mom because her mom, I think, like doesn't want her to date until she's out of high school, or at least until she's like 16 and finding herself. She is a poet and she discovers the poetry club at her school and realizes that it's something she's really good at. But is this something she can pursue? Can she express herself? She grows up in a house that is not very understanding of her expressing herself. So she's going through a lot of like conflict and trying to figure out like what's important to her and how she can like chase what's important to her. I said the poems were well written. Again, it's Elizabeth Acevedo, so like I knew it was going to be really good. And I felt like I could really connect with a character who's quite different from me. Is there anything that I still haven't talked about? Oh, I didn't talk about Goliath by Tochi Onyebuchi. This was recommended by Angela on her channel Literature Science Alliance. I think she maybe also recommended This Is How You Lose the Time War. She's really good for science fiction recommendations. And when she recommended this book, she was like, this book is long, and like she was saying that a lot of the people that she knew that read it didn't like it, but she really liked it. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to see how I feel about it because it sounded really interesting. It is a near future retelling of the biblical epic of David and Goliath, kind of reframed through the lens of gentrification. And I thought it was really, really interesting. I listened to it on audiobook. And I think that if I had read it, I might have fallen under the don't like it so much camp because it's just long. There were parts where like people would be telling a story about like one guy, like there was this part where I believe it was Bishop. Bishop's a really powerful guy in his community. And he's telling a story for what must have been like 10 pages about this guy who seems really sweet and docile, but when he starts playing video games, he's like, he's scary, man. And he tells a story about this guy for like so long. And I was like, this does feel kind of like I'm reading the Bible. On the one hand, I can see how that would be boring. But on the other hand, I was like, this is kind of cool from a retelling perspective. And I've decided that I really like retelling and the idea of like taking something that already exists and seeing how it can apply to other situations. So is it boring to talk about one character for 20 pages? Yeah, but like it did feel like it was capturing the spirit of the Bible, if that makes sense. This book is about, well, I think Bishop is Goliath. He's this big, powerful guy in a near future like city, and he is like the guy that if you have a problem, people come to you, right? If there's a building that's crumbling and it's dangerous, you're like, hey, the government isn't taking care of this. Can you take care of this? Like people were kind of coming to him to seek help with things that the people who were supposed to be helping them weren't helping with. Because we're living in this future where it took me a while to pick up on like who the colonists were, although now that I think about it, it's a little on the nose. But the colonists are people who went to live on the moon, Mars. They went up to space and they left all the poor people. And then you have David, who comes down from the colony. I can't even remember why he comes down, actually, but he meets this guy, Jonathan. They want to fix the neighborhood, and they really convince themselves that they're doing the right thing. And this is another book where I think they did a really good job of like showing the white perspective on like when they think that what they're doing is not problematic, when we think what we're doing is not problematic, but it is. These guys are not just overtly racist. In fact, they often think they're doing the right. I mean, kind of a lot of their racism comes from, oh, look at these poor people who can't help themselves. We're going to help them. And that's like a different kind of racism. Why are you, who like aren't even from this community, the one who can save them? So like that's kind of going on. And it doesn't even really, I guess it is kind of like the story of David and Goliath, because I don't feel like David and Goliath interact up until that final battle. And the same thing happens here. There's not like a lot of interaction between David and Bishop. at all, I think. I enjoyed it. Was it sometimes slow? Yeah, but I thought it was an effective retelling of a biblical epic, and I thought the commentary was good. Okay, whew, I finally talked about all the books that I've read, so let's finish with the stats. My most read authors, of course, were Rick Riordan with 3 books, and Ashley Herring Blake, because I did read 2 of her books this year. All books in this time period are in English. I am considering reading Percy Jackson in Spanish this year just to practice my Spanish, and because it would be fun to reread like The Lightning Thief, go all the way back. So maybe all my books in this time period won't be in English next year. We'll see. My reading did kind of fluctuate, although of course this is a graph of when I finished books, so it's not, the most reliable. But I know I read a lot of pages at the beginning of the year because I read Assassin's Quest and American Gods. Within the first 2 months of the year, I had already read like 1,500 pages from just those 2 books. So that was kind of crazy. And then August was a really good month for me because we went on vacation. I read Circe, Daisy Jones, and then like 2 other books that I read at like a normal pace for August. Oh, it says I only read 3 books. Okay. But still, it was more than average for me. And then in December, of course, I read 6 books in December. At the last minute, I finished this and this and Goliath, and I read 2 graphic novels within the span of like 24 hours. I was so burnt out. For like 2 days, I was like, I'm not going to read anything. Thank you very much. My average star rating was really high this year. My average rating was 4.52, and I really don't think I'm a super easy grader in terms of stars, but I gave 5 stars to 7 books this year. That's crazy. Ship of the Dead, I'm Glad My Mom Died. I gave 5 stars to Hammer of Thor too. Okay. I really like Alex. The Girl from the Sea got 5 stars. That book made me so emotional. Daisy Jones and the Six, Assassin's Quest, and The Last Quintista. I gave 5 stars to so many books this year. I loved so many things that I read. You also had, with 4.75 stars, Legendborn, Circe, Wrath of the Triple Goddess, which I loved. But yeah, that means that half of the books that I read this year were 4.75 stars or higher. So I read a lot of books that I really enjoyed. But yeah, it was a really good reading year for me. Including audiobooks and graphic novels really helped because like now I do feel like I can say technically I met my reading goal, even if the actual amount of physical pages that I read was only a little bit more than it was before. But I still feel like my actual physical reading went up, and my number of books, including non-traditional books, really went up. And I do think I'll make my goal for next year 25 books in 2025. So yeah, if you made it this far, oh my gosh, like I get why YouTubers say that because I have been recording since like 11 a.m. and it's 4 p.m. I mean, I've taken like breaks and stuff, but like I get why YouTubers say if you made it this far, please give it a like because holy cow, this was like a whole work day. Give me a like. Subscribe if you want to because I post very sporadically. So you never know when I'm gonna post. You may as well subscribe so you see it in your feed. As I was talking earlier about how I don't really subscribe to people anymore. Oh well. But yeah, thank you for watching this whole thing. As always, let me know what your favorite book of 2024 was. I could always use some recommendations. I'm finally starting to like not buy books so much, so I'm actually working through the stuff that's on my shelves, which means I have space for more stuff, right? Not really, but I am like working my way through my TBR, so I actually could use some recommendations this year. The past couple of years, I'm like, recommend me something, but don't. I already have so much to read. This time, I'm actually like, yeah, recommend me stuff. So yeah, I hope that I have another good reading year in 2025, and I hope you do too. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.